So there's lots to talk about. Let's get to our panel. Joining us from Sao Paulo is economist and philosopher João Fonseca. From Rio de Janeiro, Bernardo Santoro. He's the president and director of the Instituto Liberal. With us here in Washington is the director of strategy for Arko advice, Thiago de Aragao, and Paulo Sotero, an old friend of the program and director of the Brazil Institute at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. Welcome all. Bernardo, I have to go to you, I think, first, because the man of the hour, this was a big upset. The polls didn't really give this huge victory much credence just a couple of weeks ago. What happened?
Oh, I don't think the polls got wrong. The polls always said that Bolsonaro would not win in the first round, but would not win in the first round, but would win the first round. So I believe the staff of Jair Bolsonaro is satisfied. Of course, it would be better for them if Bolsonaro won and finished the election in the first round. But the Bolsonaro staff is very satisfied that Bolsonaro got a lot of votes, almost got it, and it's very difficult for Fernando Haddad now to beat Jair Bolsonaro in the second round.
Bernardo, just to follow up, why did he win 46% of the vote? I mean, that's quite a lot. What was his winning formula?
Well, I believe he is translating to the politics the feelings of revolt that the Brazilian people is currently feeling. Brazilian people are very unsatisfied with the current politics made and the corruption. We have a lot of corruption in our government in the last 16 years since Workers' Party rose to power and start to ransack the public enterprises. So people are dissatisfied with the corruption, are dissatisfied with the moral standards that the Workers' Party currently realizes, and the Workers' Party also try to change some very important measures of education, health policies, and security. The Workers' Party try to change the philosophy of education, trying to impose some leftist agenda inside the schools, and this is very dissatisfied for the current current Brazilian conservative people.
Okay, João Fonseca in Sao Paulo, what is the impact of this victory, if indeed he does go on to win the second round?
Well, first of all, we have to see that his party, that's PSL, which was a very minuscule party before, and now has won the second largest number of congressmen in the lower chamber. So Bolsonaro, even though he hasn't won in the first round the presidential race, his party has won an amazing victory over the country, as have politicians who are aligned with his project. So in a whole, I think Bolsonaro and his party are very happy with the results from yesterday's elections. And now, if he wins on the runoff, he will have a Congress which is very much aligned with him. Many important groups of congressmen have already declared that they will be allied to his government, so he should have no problem passing whatever things consist of his agenda. But the thing is, he doesn't have many things in his agenda yet. He doesn't have many proposals. He has refrained from discussing public policy at all. So probably what we will see is initially they'll be voting about some economic reforms which are already being discussed this year, but which have been postponed for next year, having to do with, for instance, reforming pensions, because this creates a huge fiscal burden, a huge fiscal gap in our budget. And secondly, he's probably going to just go along with whatever these Congress groups tell him to do, which is mainly farmers, conservative religious, evangelical groups, also groups in the weapons business. So he's probably going to be a more passive president, just pushing forward and aligning himself with whatever these groups try to push him towards. He hasn't presented many ideas of what he will try to do by himself.
Paulo Sotero here in the studio. You were nodding to a lot of that, but who is he? You know, we've heard his praise for the military dictatorship. There have been some questions about women, statements about women, about black people, about gay people, evangelical vote, as we just heard. Is this a Donald Trump of Brazil?
No, that's, I think, an inappropriate comparison. Trump came through a political process. He won the nomination of the Republican Party, and obviously he governs a much stronger, richer country that has lots of margins for error. Brazil faces a much narrower reality. Brazil is on the verge of a serious fiscal meltdown. And Mr. Bolsonaro obviously revealed to be a talented sort of TV candidate. He was a backbencher in Congress for 27 years. There is one...
7 terms, right? Yeah.
7 terms. There is one law to his name. Now, he identified very clearly this anger, this frustration that exists in Brazil with corruption, with crime, with the heavy burden that the government puts on the people, its own society, but it's not clear what he proposes. In general, he proposes a very liberal, on economics, very liberal agenda, which actually Brazil could use, because Brazil is one of the most closed, or the most closed economy among middle-income countries. Now, whether this will be translated into actual measures that can be approved by Congress, whether these new people arriving in Congress are different from the previous bunch, remains to be seen, and there is a great doubt about Mr. Bolsonaro's capacity to articulate politically these people. He has really not done that so far.
Thiago, I want to get to you in a second, but let's hear from Bolsonaro himself. Let's play some sound.
Meus quase 50 milhões.
To my almost 50 million people who voted on me today, thank you again. We are together. Together, we will rebuild our Brazil.
O nosso Brasil.
So, Thiago, what can we expect if indeed he does become president? A rejection of everything we've seen in the past from Lula da Silva, the Workers' Party, a move to more sort of neoliberal economy, or what?
Look, many of the voters, they believe that a president in Brazil has more powers than he actually have. Brazil,
same for everywhere, right?
Same for everywhere. Brazil, at the end of the day, Brazil is a parliamentary country disguised as a presidentialist country. I would say that in Latin America, there is no country where the parliament is as powerful as in Brazil, which in fact is more powerful than the executive as well. Taking this into consideration, the parliament drags and pulls everyone to the center. It's a conservative, historically conservative parliament, pragmatic parliament, although many individuals leaned to corruption, some are not. I would say that Bolsonaro, he will have to create an agenda that adapts to the reality of the parliament and not the other way around. A president has the power to impose his full ideas when he has backing him up a lot of popularity. Whoever wins this election will arrive in January 1st with a lot of rejection behind his back. And I don't see that with rejection in his back, the parliament will simply succumb and accept that the agenda that comes from the presidential palace every week will simply be approved with no problem. I agree that he will have the majority, and I believe that he will have it at least the first 6 months support in the parliament, but the creation of the agenda won't be exclusively to him.
Thanks for that. Bernardo, back to you. You touched on, Thiago, about high negatives for Bolsonaro, especially among women's groups and other powerful interest groups. Is he going to be able to govern if he wins?
Well, I believe he will have absolutely no problem about sending a message of uniting people in about getting groups, special interest groups. He will unify everything in one big agenda because the Brazilian society no longer wants to have this divided society created by the extremist politics of the Workers' Party. So he will have another specialist talk about it some time ago that the Brazilian sorry, it's the sound is not very well, but
Okay.
what I'm trying to say is that Jair Bolsonaro will unite the people because the Brazilian society no longer can support this divided society.
Joel, in terms of his economic policies, there's been much made out of the fact that he has sort of aligned himself with the sort of neoliberal economists from the so-called Chicago school that kind of backed Pinochet's government during the military rule there, wants neoliberal policies for an economy which, as Paulo said, has been known to have a more protectionist bent. Is he likely to be able to do that? He's self admitted that he's not an economist.
Well, you see, during the campaign, when he first called this very neoliberal, very extreme, very radical economist to be his chief economic advisor and promising him a ministry, a very powerful ministry once he gets the job, once he gets elected, the original idea was that this economist, Paulo Guedes, would would provide Bolsonaro with the economic ideas that would guide his platform. But so far, what we have seen is the contrary. Paulo Guedes brings some idea to the public debate, like changing the way tax is collected or changing labor laws. And whenever he does that, that has a negative impact or a possible negative impact upon Bolsonaro's popularity. So he has since silenced this economist, Paulo Guedes. He's been told not to give public talks anymore, not to give interviews anymore. So I do not think it's very likely that once Bolsonaro gets elected, that he will follow Paulo Guedes' ideas for the economy as a whole. Paulo Guedes has publicly said that on the matter of pensions reform, which is a very important, and it's probably going to come up in the first 6 months of the presidency, because it's a very important reform, and the state cannot go on spending so much more than it earns. And Paulo Guedes has said that Bolsonaro is not yet convinced of the importance of this pensions reform, which would touch, of course, many sectors of public employees. So I don't think we will see a wholesale application of neoliberal ideas, but I do think we will see some privatizations. I think that's very likely. And I do think some kind of pensions reform is probably bound to happen.
Paulo Sotero, I looked up when you were last on the show and we were talking about violence and the federal police going into Rio. And you said at the time, Bolsonaro was the only candidate really focusing on the huge surge of violence seen in Brazil, over 60,000 murders last year. Is that why he's doing so well?
Part of the reason, yes, they focus on something that is in the front of the people, that people care about because it depends on their lives. Of the 50 most important largest cities on Earth, I think 17 of the 50 most violent cities in this world are in Brazil. He captured that. Now, the question is whether he has a solution for that other than arming more people, etc.
That's his solution, right? Guns,
yes,
more guns,
more people,
and more rights for police officers to shoot would-be criminals.
Well, that is not exactly be a solution, and Brazilian society would probably react against that. And I tend to think that the government of Brazil, starting in January, will be very similar to the governments that we had in Brazil before, because the problems are very complex. Pension fund reform is a very difficult thing to achieve. It's not popular. And other reforms, yes, there are measures, for instance, in trade liberalization. Brazil could do a lot of trade liberalization by administrative measures, by following the advice of some studies produced by the current government, but remains to be seen because Bolsonaro also will have in his coalition that people that represents protected areas, protected interests in Brazil, and so he will have to lead, and that is the part that a lot of people are uncertain about.
Interesting to have this debate about protectionism and liberalism like we have here in the United States, with protectionism winning out. Let's go to Thiago. I want to talk about corruption, because even though Paulo said that he's a 7-term congressman who's only had 2 bills passed, he's one of the very few that haven't been tainted with corruption. I think over 50% of the current Congress have had some sort of allegation or in some sort of legal jeopardy. Did that help? Is he clean?
Look, I can't. The only person I can affirm is clean is my mother, and above that, anyone else, we can't affirm that fully. But one thing I can affirm is that he created a very valid perception of being clean. And this perception of being clean, allied with the perception of being anti-establishment, despite the fact that he has been establishment for 30 years, plus with his military past, which brings the idea of law and order, he combined these 3 facts and he presented himself in this repackaging as something extremely new and modern. And this played a role, because this campaign is a campaign in which the voter is looking who he rejects the least. And choosing who he rejects the least based on his own personal view of how politics function, how the social environment functions, makes him decide whether to go to a direction or not. Bolsonaro was able to embody something that looks new, that looks anti-establishment, and that looks forward. While Haddad, for example, he brings the PT's nostalgia as the center of the narrative. And this is the main difference between the 2 of them.
Bernardo, thanks for that. Bernardo, following up on the military and support, there have been criticism about Bolsonaro perhaps being a threat to democracy. He's praised the military junta, which of course has cast a dark shadow over Brazilian history and politics for a long time. Are we going back to the bad old days?
Well, Bolsonaro is not very does not have. Bolsonaro actually supports the military regime, as he's called. Some people call the military regime as a dictatorship, but he doesn't think this was a dictatorship. He believes it was a democratic regime, and he claims that it was a democratic regime because we have a congressman. We have a Congress in function. We have elections. We had a constitution. So, but this is all. This was not functioning very well, and in fact, only military people could be presidents, and the most important the most important. I'm sorry, it's because it's not work very. We have a problem here.
Bernardo, we're going to try and fix. Bernardo,
but let me finish. Just finish my thought.
Of course.
Bolsonaro really is a strong supporter of the military regime because it implemented order, it implemented some kind of economic freedom, but not so much. And he supports these ideas, but he changed his mind in the economic freedom because he is now a true defender of more and more economic freedom in the military regime. Some of the most important economic enterprises was held by the state, and he is now, as somebody said before, he's now defending a lot of privatization, a very strong support of free trade with every nation. So I believe he will be a very liberal, economic liberal president in this term here.
Okay.
Well, sorry.
No, it's not a problem. I know you're having sound problems, and thanks so much for bearing with us. We really appreciate it. Let's go to Joel. let's go to Joel Fonseca, because we haven't actually brought up Fernando Haddad yet, who's the main rival going into the second round. Of course, a late fill-in for Lula da Silva after he was banned from running because he's just in jail. Is there any hope for the Workers' Party?
Well, he is having a hard time, because when Fernando Haddad first appeared, he was supposed to be this kind of renovation for the Workers' Party. So he brought new ideas, more modern thought. He distanced himself from the old corrupt elite of that party. But now, since this election began, he became this mere, we call it a street post for Lula. He's someone who just represents the idea of this, who the real candidate was supposed to be, the former president. And he's now in jail, he cannot run. But Haddad has been going through the, I would say, shameful ritual of going to prison every week or so to talk to his mentor who is in prison there and bring his message back to the party and the people. He has done that today after seeing that there will be a second round. And so instead of bringing some idea of renovation to the party, he only speaks back to those good old days when Lula was the president and Brazil was growing and people had more money and they could buy more things. They bought cell phones, they traveled. But he hasn't yet proposed anything new. On the contrary, he's proposing to bring back Dilma's. After Lula, there came Dilma, his successor, who made some very disastrous economic policies. And that's the only thing that Haddad has to propose right now is that. So I think he will have a hard time. If he wants to win, he'll have to move to the center. And right now, he's a very extreme left.
Okay, Paulo, I like the street post analogy. Is that something that dogs usually urinate against? It has the same analogy in the US. But I want to talk to you about the campaign itself, because this was a very unconventional campaign in Brazilian politics. It wasn't a big party, so they didn't get a lot of TV time. There was a lot of social media. And of course, we cannot forget that he was attacked and stabbed and spent 30 days in the hospital. I mean, if that must have transformed the whole race. How did it feel from inside? And give us a couple of key points.
Well, I think it helped him somewhat because there was sympathy. He was attacked. It helped him also by protecting him of the duty of coming out and explaining precisely what he proposes and how he will implement stuff. There will be probably a chance now in the debates in the second round for that. We don't know what quality of campaigner he really is. He has positively, he tapped on this surge of anger, frustration, social media. He used it very well. Now, the question, Nathan, to me is that this is raising expectations in Brazil will be very, very high, to a point where no reasonable politician will be able to fulfill. And I think that will be one of his main challenges.
Thank you. Thiago, last word. What can we expect between now and the actual second round? I mean, where's the political jockeying going to be, and what should we look out for?
Look, what we're going to expect is Bolsonaro behaving more controlled.
Presidential?
Trying to be less controversial. Also trying to reach for the women voting, which represents the highest rejection for him. And if he diminishes a little bit the rejection and maintains the votes that he got, he wins the election. Haddad, on the other hand, he needs to become more assertive. I believe that Haddad's only way out is attacking Bolsonaro as hard as he can, but he has a very tough job ahead of him. And I think that this election is going in Bolsonaro's way.
Right, I can't wait till you guys come back and we see who's really going to be president of Brazil. This is absolutely fascinating discussion from Brazil and here in the studio. That's it for this edition of The Heat, but the conversation does continue online. Join us on CGTN America's Facebook page or chat with us on Twitter or any other show, Twitter at CGTN America. I'm Nathan King. You can hear the music. We've got to go. Thanks for being with us.